So the Supreme Court stepped in once again and issued a 6-3 order in the battle between Texas and the Biden administration over the border. And now the Fifth Circuit is taking new action on their own on this issue of border security. So let's talk about what just happened. Now, real quick before we jump into the video, I want to ask you all for a huge favor. About 60% of all my viewers are not actually subscribed to the channel. So if you want to support this content, make sure you're subscribed and also share this video out to more people so this type of in-depth legal information gets out to more people so more people are informed about what's going on. As I mentioned in the intro, we need to talk about how the Supreme Court last week issued a 6-3 order in the SB4 Texas border dispute case, and we need to talk about what impact that is now having with the Fifth Circuit having a new hearing on this issue as well. That 6-3 order by the Supreme Court was in a couple consolidated cases, including the United States versus the state of Texas. You may recall that recently there was a different case called the Department of Homeland Security versus the state of Texas that the Supreme Court issued an order in, and that was a 5-4 emergency order that also had a lot of people talking. In that first action, the Supreme Court removed a Fifth Circuit stay which prevented the Biden administration from cutting wire in specific areas on the Texas border. That first case was focused primarily on the ability of the federal government and Border Patrol to have access to certain areas within the state of Texas along the border and whether or not they could cut wire in specific areas that the state had put in place. Then things got even more problematic and more heated with the state of Texas putting in place SB4, a new law that was set to take effect. Texas's new law, SB4, effectively makes it a crime for any individual to violate federal law by crossing into the state of Texas at any location other than a lawful point of entry. SB4 also made it a crime for anyone to illegally re-enter the state of Texas if that person had already been denied admission into the state or they had been prior removed from the state of Texas. Finally, the law here allows judges in the state of Texas to issue orders requiring those individuals who cross the border illegally to then have to return back to the foreign nation where they crossed the border. So if they came from Mexico, well then they would have to go back to the country that they crossed from. This bill, SB4, was challenged by the Biden administration and eventually made its way into federal courts. A federal district court in the state of Texas, on review, issued a preliminary injunction preventing Texas from enforcing various parts of SB4. Texas then appealed that preliminary injunction. Now, in response, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals issued an administrative stay on that lower court order, which in effect would still allow SB4 to go into effect because of that administrative stay that was issued by the Fifth Circuit. Various cases were then consolidated, and in response to that administrative stay that was issued by the Fifth Circuit, the Biden administration then sought a writ of cert or an emergency application to the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court granted the request to vacate that administrative stay, essentially remove that administrative stay, well then the lower court's preliminary injunction would go back in effect and would block SB4 from being put in place and being enforced. So that's what was at stake, whether SB4 could or could not be enforced while the Fifth Circuit appeal was happening. Well, last Tuesday, we received a 6-3 order from the United States Supreme Court, and they denied the Biden administration's request to vacate that stay. That means that the Supreme Court decided in favor of essentially leaving the administrative stay in place until the Fifth Circuit either decides on a true stay order or takes some other type of action. So what this all amounts to is the Supreme Court telling the Biden administration that their request for emergency intervention is too early. They essentially said, let the Fifth Circuit review this issue, review the stay order, find a merits decision on the stay, and then after that, come back to us if you think it's proper. Now, importantly, a lot of commentators were saying that Texas won and that Texas could still enforce SB4, that SB4 could be enforced. Now, if you just want the plain and simple of this video, whether or not SB4 can currently be enforced at the time of me filming this, the answer to that is no. SB4 cannot be enforced right now by the state of Texas. And really, that's not because of what the Supreme Court said, because like I said, the Supreme Court issued a 6-3 order denying the request to vacate the stay that, or the administrative stay that was granted by the Fifth Circuit. Now, you may be asking, okay, well, if the Supreme Court sided with Texas, why can they not currently enforce this SB4? Well, that's because of what the Fifth Circuit did after the Supreme Court issued that 6-3 order. That same day, the Fifth Circuit issued its own order, and they removed their own administrative stay. So the Fifth Circuit administrative stay that was debated in the Supreme Court and was kept in place by the Supreme Court's 6-3 order, well, that was eventually later that day removed by the Fifth Circuit itself. Now, there was some controversy around the Fifth Circuit doing that, but essentially they decided to remove the administrative stay themselves, and then they heard oral arguments on whether or not they would grant a true stay order. And last week, the Fifth Circuit heard oral arguments on the SB4 case to determine if, on the merits, they should issue a true stay order. Now, there were a lot of questions that were asked to the state of Texas representatives. One of the judges was very concerned about the application of SB4. What does this look like practically in the real world? They asked what happens if Texas takes the person, to Border Patrol, and Border Patrol essentially denies removing that person. So because the way SB4 is structured, the state of Texas and its own representatives could potentially arrest someone and then take them to the border, take them to Border Patrol, take them to the federal government after a court issues an order. Well, then what happens if the federal government or the Border Patrol themselves say that, no, they're not going to remove that person? What does that look like? And the answer Texas had is, in the real world, they don't know how this is going to play out because the state of Texas has not been allowed to enforce SB4 yet, so they don't know all the ins and outs about how this is going to operate and how this is going to work. Now, that was a very interesting line of question, and there was some pushback against Texas by some of the judges, but then there was also some back and forth where I think a lot of the judges maybe were in fact very much siding with the state of Texas. Texas, in their main position, is simply that they are coordinating the enforcement of federal laws. They are not doing anything necessarily new on their own. They're just coordinating what Congress said as far as immigration laws. They're just, helping the enforcement of federal laws. They're taking some actions on their own, but they have the authority to do this under their own police powers. The state of Texas can do this under their right to self-defense. They can do this. And there's a lot of other legal principles that they're claiming that they have the authority to currently do this. And nothing they are doing is contradicting or is preempted in any way by federal law. Then there was a discussion, well, if there is some sort of issue with SB4 in specific language as far as the ability to deport someone or remove them from the United States, well, then there is severability language that is included in SB4. Now, if you're not aware of what severability is, essentially it's a clause that is usually added to a lot of these pieces of legislation like SB4 that simply says, if a court finds that any section of this law is unconstitutional or invalid, simply that line would be struck out, but the rest of the law, like SB4, would remain in effect. So if the court here, the Fifth Circuit, finds that the ability to remove someone from the United States is only within the power of the federal government, and the state of Texas cannot create a law that does that, or cannot create this type of scheme that, assists in that. If the Fifth Circuit finds that, Texas cannot do that, well, then severability would say, okay, you just strike out that language, but leave in place the rest of SB4, like the ability of Texas to arrest someone who is illegally in the area. And the federal government's attorney was asked very expressly by one of the judges, wouldn't you have to win against every provision of SB4, not just simply find that one provision is improper and then you would get a blanket preliminary injunction? And that signals very clearly that maybe the judges here would find issue with one specific provision within SB4, maybe the removal language, but they would leave the rest in place at least temporarily while they are reviewing the merits of the case. Now, even with that, I do want to note that the federal government and the representative said, well, even if the Fifth Circuit says that, yes, they're going to grant a true stay order, because again, before it was an administrative stay, now this is a review of a true stay order to get to the preliminary injunction stage. What the federal government said is, if the Fifth Circuit grants a true stay order, well, then you should hold that stay for 3 days so that we can decide if we want to go up to Supreme Court. And if they're saying that, that means that's what they're going to do. And then they also said, once they do that, you should put a permanent delay on the stay's effectiveness while we seek, once again, Supreme Court review of a true stay order, which again, Justice Barrett alluded to in her concurrence, saying, if you lose at a true stay order, not just administrative stay, but a true stay, if you lose a true stay, come back to us and maybe we will reevaluate it. So that's, I think, what the federal government is signaling they are going to do. So this is becoming a legal mess. There's a lot of nuance going on with this, and I anticipate this is once again going to make its way back up to Supreme Court on a true stay request. So again, hopefully you guys found this video helpful, gave you some insight about what's going on in this important legal battle. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and comment down below, and I will try to answer the best of my ability. Also, if you like this video and you like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of two-way news. But as always, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by Armed Scholars, and this nation will be maintained by Armed Scholars.